We are live on YouTube, and we are also recording on Zoom. And Mr. Jacobs, at this time, I'll turn it over to you to open the.
I have a motion to reconvene the public meeting at 7:47 p.m.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America.
and to the republic which it stands,
Stands.
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
For all.
May I have a motion to adjourn to board workshop at 7:48 p.m.?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we're now in workshop.
Share screen. Yep. This one? All right. You're playing. Thanks, George. There we go. Thank you, sir. Okay, good evening, everyone. And this evening, it's a continuation. This evening's workshop is a continuation of our workshop discussion last week, where we addressed some strategic planning guidelines from the Board of Education and essentially created a rationale for next year's spending plan as it relates to the accomplishment of promoting our instructional core and our strategic mission to educate, train, and inspire our students. Elevate, engage, and inspire our students. The guiding principles set forth for the 2021-22 school budget have not changed since last week. This is sort of a rehash from last week, so I don't necessarily want to go into any great detail because we did have a pretty extensive discussion as to what those principles are. But again, this slide has not changed. This evening, we will be looking to continue our conversation about aligning resources to district strategic goals in the three categories of athletics, extracurricular activities, and facilities work that are part of next year's general fund budget. We are also going to follow that conversation with some discussion on the financials in this budget, in this general fund budget, and have and answer any questions that the Board of Education may have to that end. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Pilla, our athletic director, to give us an overview of our athletics budget for 2021-2022. Bill?
Thank you, Dr. Pritchard. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well and enjoying the good weather that we had today. For our first slide, our 2021-2022 athletics budget is it's a very effective and responsible budget for this upcoming school year. It's going to stay consistent with this past year, with really the only increases being with contractual obligations. We will be able to run all 30 of our sports programs fully, completely intact, and we anticipate a full schedule of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association in Section 1 for the 21-22 year. We're also able to have our high-risk sports be COVID tested if needed through one of our budget lines, our contractual 2855.400 if it is in fact needed. And also our equipment lines and our reconditioning lines will be intact for any requirements that we need for the upcoming school year. You can go to the next slide. It basically just shows you our offerings, the 21 and 22 year for the fall. And then can we get to, there you go. So it's exactly what we offered this past school year. The next slide after that is our winter offerings, which is quite robust. And then our third slide is our spring offerings. We had put in for this past year's budget, girls golf. That was the one program that was new. So I'm proud to say that we're going to have a girls golf program, long overdue in our school district, and we have plenty of young ladies that have already signed up for that. And that's basically it. Thanks very much, guys.
So next will be followed, Mr. Pillow will be followed by Dr. Kulat, who will be reviewing our curriculum and instruction extracurricular activities and the budget implications. Dr. Kulat.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchard. Thank you, Board of Education. So our goal budgetarily for next year really is to maintain, reintroduce, and enhance our existing programs, in particular the enrichments and extracurricular activities, so that we can rebuild the momentum that we had in these programs in the past. Momentum in terms of high enrollment, a high level of enthusiasm from students and parents, and most importantly, attendance. You know, one of the things that we're really focused on and have been with Dr. Tesik's office is chronic absenteeism, which really has taken on a whole new meaning over the past year plus. And as we move forward, one of the ways that we're going to address absenteeism is through our extracurricular activities and programs by reintroducing all of those wonderful enrichments, all of the secondary clubs that we have at the middle school and high school to have in-person learning experiences for our kids for next year. Another big piece is that we're going to be addressing learning loss as well as regression in all content areas with a robust summer program that you will see taking place in all 4 schools across every grade level. And those opportunities will be afforded to all of our students, not only this summer, but throughout the next school year. We're also happy that we're going to be offering our 6th annual summer STEAM camp in end of June, early July, and that will also be all in person. We're really also rethinking how we can provide opportunities for our students to collaborate, communicate, and work together in a way in this new environment that's safe. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Rallo to talk about our capital.
Thank you, Dr. Kulat. So on this slide, you'll see we have 3 different slides for you to look at. The first one is going to be the facilities working plan. The second one's going to talk about district-wide maintenance projects. And the last one's going to talk about the summer 2021 capital projects and planning. So here's the facilities budget working plan. What we wanted to do is we wanted to consolidate some of our line items, which we have between buildings. Basically, there's a lot of line items that cover each building, and we end up moving a lot of monies around for that if it's needed. So we wanted to assist in reducing the budget transfers. So we consolidated telephone, heating oil, electricity, gas heating, cleaning, refuse, elevator inspections and stuff, and water usage. That's also going to end up being security services as well. The second thing we did was we wanted to separate the landscaping and snow removal items, the line items, just so we would have a better, center around, cost of both of those. The other thing we talked about was, developing professional development opportunities for staff So we raised the maintenance conference line. What this will do is this will raise the level of skills of all of our in-house staff, which will just benefit us. So anyway, here we also increased the supplies and materials approximately 15%. This is one of our bigger items that we did. So what we're trying to do is really to cover the additional costs of cleaning supplies. This is like a COVID impact type item right here. Everything costs money. Supplies and materials are going to cost a lot more money, as well as you can see the line after this. It's going to cover the cost of rising cost of materials, shipping, manufacturing, all the COVID safety protocols that are in place. Everything's going up in price because of more increased protocols. So we unfortunately had to raise that up to bring us in line. Plus, those were items that we always have. We always seem to have a little shortage on money, and especially if we're going to do more in-house repairs and stuff. Anyway, the last thing we did was we had a new on-demand contract for telephone repair. So unfortunately, the prices went up for that, so we had to cover the rising cost of the new on-demand contract. Okay, Bob. Yep. So my favorite is district-wide projects. So this is in the budget for 2021, 2022. This is basically the small maintenance projects, not the capital planning, but this is the small maintenance projects. So basically, this money would be revolved around, basically stuff we've been working on, ongoing stuff that we want to continue working on, and classroom work. For instance, LED lighting, ceiling grid and tile installation, possibly installing classroom casework, classroom flooring overlay, maybe some controls and BMS upgrades, and then we're going to bring in a company to look at sound systems district wide where needed, and just at least give us an assessment, and then if they need to be addressed, we'll address them. The next one is capital projects. So this is our $2 million. This is summer 2021 phase 1. So that was submitted to SED on February 25th. We estimate that the SED approval will be approximately 12 weeks, which is puts us at 5/25/21. Assuming we get approval and we put the bid out, that week. I wouldn't say that maybe not that next day, but at least that week, and then get the bid back, and construction would start 6/28/21, and that's the bathroom renovation at Schaefer, the fountain replacement at Schaefer, the additional electric branch panels, and the continuation. So at Cottage Lane this past summer, we did a CT box and some new conduit down to Cottage Lane, and this would be the replacement of the main distribution panel down in the boiler room, which will allow us to have better electrical systems. The summer 2021 phase 2 will be submitted on 4/16, which is Thursday, right? The estimated SED approval, we're assuming it's coming back around 7/16 or 7/23. The release date for the bid will be 9/1/21, and construction to start in November of 21. This will be the Soames vault transformer, main distribution panel, and 5 new branch panels, the auditorium sound and audio visual system, and then approximately 40 existing and additional new branch panels at Tappan Zee High School. Also, the Tappan Zee High School and Soames clocks, speakers, lockdown systems. The only difference is that is a proprietary item. So as soon as the approval comes back and we get your blessing, then we're going to begin construction as soon as we can, which hopefully we can get a lot of the wires in the ceiling this summer. And then finally, last but not least, the summer 2021 in-house, which is not to exceed the 437,000, would be the prevention center at Tappan Zee High School and the move of the assistant principals into a new office area over there where guidance was. So that is going to also be actually release date bid on 4/16/2021 because that's not being submitted to SE date. The bid opening is set for 4/29/21 and hopefully the approval on 5/6, which is the board meeting from you guys. And construction would start, as soon as we can, get the kids out of school on 6/28. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Girandola. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rallo. Thank you, Board of Education. We're going to look at a budget comparison this year compared to last year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the revenue and expense size and how it compares to our previous year's budget, as well as our fund balance and federal aid. So if we look at our revenue projection for the upcoming 21-22 school year, we are looking at a 1.41% increase, which equates to $1,368,864. The majority of our revenue base comes from the local share. It is the largest source of our revenue, but our tax cap is only increasing by 0.1%, or $81,919. The state aid reflected in this general fund revenue budget is also based on the recently enacted governor's budget. And always we will continue to look for revenue streams if and when they become available. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Expenses. When we look at our general fund expenses for the 21-22 school year, they're broken down into the following categories: general support, instruction, transportation, employee benefits, debt service, interfund transfers. General support, if we look at the comparison from year to year, there has been a decrease this year. The majority of that decrease is the $1.75 million that was moved out of district-wide projects and moved to be able to transfer to the capital fund for the purposes of summer work. Some of the increases in that general support line have to do with the increased cleaning supplies, services, and materials, and the increases in public information, mostly all of this related to COVID-19. The general support portion of the budget really supports policy, fiscal accountability, legislation and regulations, and a lot of the requirements of a school district, such as legal fees, auditing fees, maintenance and operation of the plant, safety, central printing, assessments on school property, the BOCES admin and capital share for South Orangetown, as well as the Board of Ed, central administration, business, and so on. So a lot of those general support expenses are based on requirements of a school district. And we will always continue to monitor those and look for cost savings. When we look at instruction, the increase in instruction is partly contractual and partly we are looking to address learning loss as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Transportation is our contractual increase there. And in the benefits, you'll see that we are seeing a decrease in the benefits. We did a very in-depth analysis. We see that there is an increase of participation in the health and dental buyout So instead of taking the district offered benefits, people are taking the buyout instead, which is resulting as a cost savings to the district. As well as we did shift to some benefits in the previous years, and we're really starting to see the cost savings of those as well. If I can take you to the next slide, please. Here's our fund balance projection as of today. We are anticipating an increase in fund balance of about 5.7 million, which keeps the district financially stable. It allows us to put aside our 4% undesignated fund balance and fund our reserve accounts appropriately. This really allows the district to demonstrate a strong financial position, solid financial planning, and fiscal management as well. And if we could go to the next slide, please. We just recently received, regarding the American Rescue Act, a memo from the Chief Financial Officer of NYSED that the enacted budget does deem stimulus 2 and 3. Stimulus 2 is the elementary and secondary school emergency relief stimulus package, and stimulus 3 is the American Rescue Act. These are being deemed as special aid funds, so they are not part of the general fund. NYSED also just recently released as well that the application process for both of these stimulus monies will be forthcoming at the end of this month. So we will continue to communicate with NYSED, get our information, and put our plan together for those federal dollars as well. But as you can see on the screen, primarily, these grants are meant to address the targeted academic supports, the mental health and social emotional learning, as well as the health and safety of our students and staff. Thank you. And question?
Thank you, Ms. Girandola. I would be remiss at this point if I didn't introduce prior to questions and feedback. I know earlier we talked about who's actually here in the room. So just for the folks listening at home on YouTube, we have Dr. Lloyd, who is our Director of Facilities. We have Dr. Kulak, our the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction. We have Mr. George Brady, who is our Director of Instructional Technology. We have Dr. Karen Tessick, who is our Executive Director for Personnel Support, rather. Mr. Jack Brallo next to me, who is our Director of Facilities, and myself, Dr. Pritchard, I'm the Superintendent of the school district. So again, at this point, I'd like to open the conversation up. Mr. Pilla, our Athletic Director, and Ms. Girandola, our school business administrator at this point, but I know her official title is Acting Executive Director for Finance and Management Services. So with that, again, I'd like to turn it over to the Board of Education for any questions you might have and any feedback you'd like to provide us as we continue to move forward with our budget process.
Any board member want to go first with the questions? I guess I don't see any head nod, so I'll go first. I'll start asking questions. So my first question relates to athletics. One of the questions I have with athletics, and I didn't see it in the slide, is how does transportation or does transportation affect the athletic budget for next year? Because of COVID constraints, or I shouldn't say because of, with potential COVID constraints, will we need additional busing that would increase the athletic busing costs? And is that addressed in your budget?
We did not address that in our budget because we did not have much of an issue with that this year, even with the COVID constraints, because of the size of most teams, and the fact that we do allow students to have their parents drive them. If they fill out some forms for us, they are allowed to have their parents drive them, which some parents have chosen to do. So we don't anticipate that to be much of an issue. If it was to be an issue, then we'd be able to address it in a couple of different ways. One, of course, being that we could limit the amount of student athletes that would go to away games. And like I said, we didn't have any issues with that this past year because we did have some kids that opted to have their own families drive them.
Okay, I mean, I'd rather not limit, I'd rather not limit student participation because of a transportation issue. But I hear what you're saying, that if it becomes an issue, there's a way to address it so that.
Correct.
But again, I wouldn't like you to address it in terms of limiting.
No, I think there's only a certain amount of teams that would go over that number, right now. And again, it seems like it's getting better and better. But the constraints for us for most of the year were 1 student per seat. So we were looking at 21 per team for a game. And for most sports, you don't have over that amount of kids. So we're not really limiting, any sport really. We would normally have 2 buses go. I'll use the sport of football because usually have larger numbers, and we would usually have 2 buses for that anyway. So our numbers are really in line for what they've been in the past. So we really just luck out in that respect.
All right. So again, my concern was that you had it covered, and you have it covered, which I'm glad.
We have it covered,
We have it covered.
100%.
Moving to facilities, Mr. Rowley, you made a comment that the clocks in the speaker system was proprietary. And I just want clarification. Is it proprietary or is it off the state contract list?
Yes, it's off the state contract, Lonnie.
All right. I appreciate that clarification. I don't want someone, misunderstanding that we're buying proprietary equipment that has a dollar value associated with it, or a premium dollar value associated with it, that this work was still bid off the state bid list instead of having the district go out independently to bid for it. So it was still a completely bid project. With regard to consolidating those line items for the electric, the gas, the heating oil, and things like that, I'm a little bit, concerned, or I'll say not in favor of that. I'd rather see the line items budgeted properly to avoid the transfers based upon our experience and knowledge, because, these items are items that we typically go out for contract for. And when we go out for contract, if we want to go back and see what our, experience has been with cost, instead of being able to go to a particular budget line item and look at the history of that cost, now you're going to be trying to pull that cost out of a conglomerate of other items. So, personally, my recommendation would be to let's sharpen our pencil and focus more on properly budgeting to minimize the budget transfers than to use consolidation to reduce the number of budget transfers.
So just so I can make you clear on this one. Basically what we had is we had between the buildings, we have I'm just going to read a couple line items here, Lonnie. It's telephone administration, telephone TZHS, telephone SOMS, obviously TZE, Schaefer, Cottage Lane, and Greenbush. So what we did, instead of doing that, each item is broken down, and then that total for telephone would be put all together in one line item, so that we're not having to if we run a little bit less at Greenbush for the telephone, we don't need to put a budget transfer in for, a couple of dollars. So we're not consolidating all of those line items into one thing. We're just keeping telephone, heating oil. It's just that we're consolidating the line items for those, for those items separately. And then I believe Cleo wanted to also add something to that for the reason that we did this.
So we track all of those expenses as well, all year long separately by building. And with the ESSA reporting requirements, those are all considered central district costs. So it kind of creates some efficiencies when it comes to ESSA reporting for the school district, but we are still maintaining those building by building costs. We're just going to maintain them outside of the financial management system. We were kind of doing it redundantly. We were maintaining it in the financial management system and keeping track of it externally within our Excel documents as well. So now we're just looking to continue to keep track of it in Excel, yet have it function for us better in the financial management system.
Okay, I mean, I expressed my concerns and you apparently have addressed the abilities to track them in an alternate way, so.
Right, we will always be tracking them in an alternate way as we have been.
Okay. Going back to the facilities work at the high school, I noticed that the high school auditorium work, the sound system is scheduled to start in the fall. And I just raised the question in terms of coordinating that with the fall play. That, you know, after missing the previous fall play for COVID reasons, I don't want to miss the fall play because of facilities work. So will that work be coordinated around the fall play?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's another thing that we probably could, we put that out there. But once the bid is done, I'm assuming that's not going to take that long to start, 2 months to start it. I would think it would start right there in September. Sound system wouldn't be that big of a deal that, it couldn't be done in probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month.
Okay, again, I just want to make sure it's coordinated with the fall play, that it doesn't interfere with it. My next question relates to the COVID expenses. We heard various items of the budget were, adjusted in this budget preparation cycle with regard to potential costs related to COVID-19. And I just question, are we maintaining a running log of what our additional costs are for COVID-19 so that in the event that some aid comes through at one point or the other, we'll be able to speak cleanly as to what the additional expenses have been?
Yes, we are tracking all of the COVID-19 supplies and materials for that purpose.
Okay, and then on the flip side of that, are we also keeping track of any COVID savings that we may encounter? For example, when, I'll use last year for an example, but, when we had reduced busing transportation costs, because everybody was remote, we had some savings there, although there was some contract negotiations and so forth. But I'm sure within all the additional costs we've encountered because of COVID-19, there are also some savings that we've encountered as well. And we shouldn't, ignore those. We should monitor those as well.
Yeah, we do continually review those because we are always comparing we're performing against budget and the reason whether we're over or under, and specifically as it's related to COVID-19, we are tracking that as well.
Okay. And then my last question is, I understand we're looking at the budget, we're looking at a 0.1% increase in terms of the budget to budget with regard to the tax revenue portion of it. Do we know how the split will be with regard to homestead, non-homestead? because, we can say that there's a 0.1% difference in the budget, but if there's a significant shift between homestead, non-homestead, then the taxpayers are still going to be looking at a large increase, or on the, flip side is if there's a shift to the non-homestead, then, there would be a reduced tax burden on the taxpayers as it shifted to the commercial businesses.
My understanding is I don't think those are available as of yet. We would have to speak with the town of Orangetown. As far as how the proportion that's homestead and non-homestead, we haven't gotten that information yet. I should say I haven't gotten that information yet.
Is there a way to reach out to the town and see whether they have an estimated,
Yes.
or, is the homestead, non-homestead participation going to be similar to last year, or, with, what's transpired in the housing market and housing that's sold, is there going to be a shift to homestead, or, will there be a shift to non-homestead? Because obviously, that can have an impact on what the taxpayers ultimately see with regard to our homeowner taxpayers versus our commercial business taxpayers.
Yes, I can reach out to the town and see if they have that information available, and or an estimate of what they think it might be.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for now. Does another board member have questions?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. So on the athletic side, Bill, I'm really hopeful that we will have all the sports on the 3 seasons. However, if there are some impacts due to COVID, and I'm not talking about the testing, but say perhaps there's shifting that occurs like it did this year. Football was in the spring versus the fall. Do we have we taken any of that type of consideration, or have you checked the pulse of, what other districts are doing? Is that a potential concern, and could that impact any of the line items in the budget?
No, I mean, if you go through this year, we will, if things go the way they're supposed to through June 13th, which is the last date to play an interscholastic contest, we'll have played every one of our teams will have played, with the exception of the modified that was canceled in the fall and the winter. So at the high school level, we'll have played everything. So now that modified is back, we're anticipating that we will have a regular athletic year starting in the fall. That has been the word since day one of our our meetings after the first of this year, and it looks like it's going in that direction. So I don't anticipate anything different unless something in this world, right? Anything can happen. We'll be ready for it. No doubt about it, that if we have to switch seasons like we have this year, something I never thought I would see in my professional career, but we've made it work and we'll make it work again.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Bill. On the curriculum side, Dr. Kula, you had attacking the learning loss with summer programs. Of course, we have the STEAM. Was there any consideration for additional programs or anything from the after school or preschool, prior to the start of school, to address any of the learning loss from the COVID year?
Yeah, so we're starting this summer in all 4 schools, as I mentioned. However, those programs are going to continue throughout the entire school year. So Dr. Tessick and I are working with our principals and teacher leaders to put together a comprehensive program that really goes through June of 2022 and probably beyond that, because the stimulus money, it extends even beyond that. Our goal is to give every child the opportunity to attend school either in the summer or before school or after school next year, so that they can catch up. whatever grade level that they're at and wherever they may need the help, as well as the social and emotional support that we've been talking a lot about. The other piece to this is we have all of these after-school enrichments and extracurricular activities as well as sports. And so we have to strike a balance so that, we can get the kids here who need to be here to catch up academically, but we also want to motivate the kids to come to school because of all the other great things that make our school district so special. So we're really trying to put something together so that we can increase attendance across the board for those kids that maybe have stopped coming to school and may have a hard time coming back. We're going to give them opportunities to do that as well over the summer. This is inclusive of our incoming 8th grade, our incoming 9th graders. So a lot of thought and planning is going into this, and it's not just this summer. It will extend both before school and after school for the entire school year next year and possibly beyond that.
Okay, all right, great. So will it be a combination, will it be structured, like scheduled? We have 30 minutes scheduled for, math to help support any gaps in math, or will it be structured like that? Or will it also have a combination of structured and as needed?
Yeah, so we are modeling our summer programming a little bit after how we've done STEAM camp, because we know a child who maybe needs help in math probably also may need help in some other areas. So we're putting together a program where kids will cycle through, and we're individualizing those programs based on student need. So just to give you an example, at the high school level, you may have a student who really needs some help because they're moving on to a geometry course, or they're taking algebra, or maybe they're moving from pre-calculus to calculus. At the same time, they may not need reading intervention. That may be a strength of theirs, but they may need social and emotional support because they've been fully distanced for the past 12 months. So what we're doing is we're hiring the staff. Once we know who the staff are, we can really custom tailor a program better to meet individual student needs. And it will be a 4-hour program from 8:30 to 12:30, for example, and you won't be getting math all day long for 3.5 hours because that's what you need help in. You'll be getting a little bit of math, but you'll also be getting some other opportunities.
And this, of course, will be in addition to office hours that all the
Yes.
instructors have as well. So, okay. All right, that's great. On the facility side, I still have a concern, as I've mentioned previously, about this summer's work and the lateness and getting the bid, the documents to SED and so forth. Do we have a, I know that the architect had said, and the construction manager said that they would be constant communication with contractors. So I just want to make sure that is still in place, because that could, of course, seriously impact the bids, considering that we're going out so late for the phase 1 work.
Yes, I agree, Christine. Being that it's going to probably come out and be released sometime in May, late May, it usually does affect it, but I know that Lou and Lauren, again, they have been in constant contact with contractors, and we have some decent contractors that we will reach out to as well. Here we have a list of contractors that we want to reach out to as well, and invite them to bid on the projects. This past summer was great. We had really good contractors come in here. So honestly, we'll be sending out to those guys as well.
Okay, all right. Also, on the COVID related expenses, like, the extra cleaning that you talked about, you had said 15% increase due to that. I recall this past year, we kind of got a head start in getting those orders in place, because, will we have a concern of supply? I mean, all the schools are going to be ordering 15% more of cleaning supplies. So I just want to make sure we're going to be managing some of that, so that we have plenty, when the school year gets started.
Yeah, we made a couple of really great contacts this year with the cleaning chemicals, and we have our suppliers in line. We have multiple suppliers, so that we can if one doesn't have this week, we can get from another one. But we've been maintaining a pretty decent inventory and we'll continue to do that through next year.
Okay, all right, great. Just want to keep staying ahead of that. So, so one last question on the budget. On the slide for the general funds revenue, Cleo, I don't recall if you were regarding the use of money and property, that increased quite a bit, nearly doubled. So what, did you mention what that increase was for?
Well, that was, we terminated a lease and took out an additional lease, as well as, so in last year's budget, because they were negotiating a lease, the revenue was not included because it wasn't settled at that time, but all of our leases are settled. They're, I think the earliest one ends in 2025. So this will pretty much be the use of money property figure you will see going forward.
Oh, okay. So that was probably the Palisade School then, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, great. And then last quick question on the benefits. You had mentioned a lot of the savings or the decrease was due to dental buyouts. So is,
right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, health and dental.
Health and dental buyouts. So my assumption is that the staff has already made those choices then for next year. So you have that locked and loaded. It's not a variable number that could potentially change.
It could potentially change because people's circumstances change, but we've kind of embedded that into the budget that we put together. So we've allowed some room for movement there should people decide to take the health insurance. Plus, we really only have open enrollment in November of every year. So if outside of that November enrollment, you would need a qualifying circumstance to be able to change your benefits.
Right.
But again, we have included some ability for movement there should people change their minds or their life circumstances change as well.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Just going back to Christine's question about the late bidding on the summer work. Can we provide preliminary copies of the drawings and specifications to potential bidders before SED approval? That way they have an opportunity to review the drawings and, get a head start on their bid so that we can reduce the time after SED approval to actually hold the bid.
I'd have to check with Lauren and Lou about that. I don't think you're supposed to do that because of the the general bid, basically. You're basically playing favorites.
If you could look into that, because if we can advertise that we have some preliminary drawings available for their review, that might be a way to get the drawings in the potential bidders' hands. And as long as we don't do it exclusively to one or two bidders, if we make them available to all, hopefully, if you check with legal counsel, that's something we can do, and maybe provide an opportunity for the potential bidders to review the drawings ahead of time, sharpen their pencils, and then reduce that window between SED approval and actually the bid date.
Sounds good. I will reach out to Lauren and Lou and then see what we can do.
Okay. Does another board member have questions?
I have a question for Cleo regarding transportation for students. I'm just wondering, could that number 88,000 go up? And I'm kind of thinking of a scenario where more students are allowed into the classroom, but the distance requirements on the bus are still in effect. Would we require more buses, and could that number go up?
It's possible. It's
Okay.
possible. I know our our transportation companies are looking for additional monies. We haven't agreed to anything with them yet going forward. It is possible, but I think their capacity is limited. So we'll have to come up with some other creative ways, should that happen.
Okay, I know the variables keep changing and the distance requirements keep changing, so it's definitely a moving target.
Mr. Henry, we're actually looking at mitigation strategies because as Ms. Girandola had suggested, capacity on the supply side, I should say, is limited. But I know other districts in the county as well as ours, we're exploring other ways to other mitigation strategies such as face shields. Given family relationships and those types of things, that might be the sort of those things that get us through.
Okay.
And allow us to not contribute to a spread of virus.
Thank you.
Right. And we do have additional routes built into this figure as well. But again, with the not knowing exactly what the next school year is going to look like, as Dr. Pritchard said, we will continue to monitor it and plan.
Kara, I see
Yeah.
you wanted to ask a question. Dan raised his hand. Dan, do you want to go? You want to let Dr. Stepanian go? He's giving you the go ahead, Dr. Stepanian.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't see Dan on my screen. So I just some further questions about the learning loss programs. And the first question is, how will the enrollment work? Is it will it be limited to students who are classified? Will it be open to everybody? Will it be invite only? Well, let's start with that question.
Great. So right now, what we're doing, as I mentioned, is hiring the staff. Once we have the staff in place, we'll have a better sense of how many kids we can accommodate in which weeks. You will see summer programming running throughout the summer, depending on the school, for different populations of kids, as well as for all kids. So it really depends on the need of the kid and the program that we're running. Every kid will have an opportunity, not necessarily this summer. We're starting by targeting kids that we already have identified for a variety of reasons, either academic or social or emotionally. However, we're going to try to accommodate as many kids as we can, keeping in mind that we have to have small enough class sizes so that the interventions are effective. So it really is a balancing act, really, going into this summer. We also are in a position where we're concerned about kids coming, because if you haven't been coming to school all year, and now we're reaching out to you to invite you in for a summer program, we want to have some way of motivating the kids to do that, which is really what Ms. Lee's question earlier about what is the day going to look like for the child who comes. Because if you're going to expect someone who struggles with math to sit in a classroom for 4 hours a day in August, just doing math all day long, that's probably not the best way to motivate that child to get back into school. So we're really individualizing this program based on every individual student's need. And it's not just kids with special needs. It's not just English language learners. It's not just our children who maybe are deemed as gifted. It's every child, because we know every single child in this district has had learning loss. Regardless of what level you're at, regardless of what classes you're taking, every kid needs the opportunity. So our plan is to start tracking this beginning at the end of June, in July, and to ensure that by June of 2022, every child has had this opportunity. So it's complicated because we only have so many staff that are going to work this summer, and we have to figure out what those numbers will be.
Is there an estimated time on when you think you'll be inviting kids? Because then it gets into that, once you get closer to the end of the year, you get into that situation where, especially with younger kids, they're already signed up and paid for camp.
So the postings are going out for staff this week.
Okay.
We expect to be able to hire all of the staff by next week, and then we will be extending invitations to those students once we know how many teachers we have and which weeks they're available to work. So within the next 2 weeks.
Right. The goal is to get the platform of offerings out for the summer by no later than May 15th.
Oh, yeah.
So that parents are fully aware we can enroll. And with regard to enrollment from the special education side, our case managers will be reaching out to parents to let them know that, based upon their current assessment data, that they believe this would be a good fit for their child, knowing full well that some of our students have extended school year services and things like that. So to Brian's point, if they can't come during the summer, that doesn't mean the district won't offer it in the fall. So it will continue to, we'll continue to monitor that. In addition to that, specifically for special ed, we will be offering, and it is only to our special ed students who receive speech, OT, and PT, certain parts of their program, because we do have some occasions where that will need to be what we call bridged over, so that we don't see any regression over the summer, because we were worried about that. And then I think a big piece of it, as Brian said, is it's really not about, if you're in a specific, excuse the expression, label, special ed or E&L, it's about grouping the kids strategically so that the intervention happens to the students who need it, regardless of classification or E&L status. Everybody gets what they need. And I think it's a massive undertaking. As we sat and talked for hours the other day with instructional coaches and really tried to work this out, it really, it's a master plan. It's not easily communicated yet, but once we have the staff in place and the plans in place, we can move it forward.
And the other last point I'll make is that it's a two-way street. We want to reach out to the kids and families and invite them in and get them in, but we're also absolutely going to accommodate any family or child whose parent says, hey, my child needs this. This is what I believe they need, and can they come? So it's going to work both ways.
And thank you, Dr. Tessick. You anticipated my next question. with the special ed kids. And then, so that will, from what I understand, then that's going to continue on in September when the school year starts, either before or after school. Is that
before school, after school? We've also talked specifically about using different PPS staff members for ideas of counseling, integrating OT, PT, and speech in different ways. We've started to do that last year, actually, very well at William O. Schaefer. And we've learned a lot from their collaborative efforts over there to mitigate the impact on instructional time for related services. So there's a lot of strategic thinking about how best to meet the needs of students, both academic.
Integrated into the classroom rather than pull out services, you mean?
So they actually were doing a pull-out period, but they integrated speech and occupational therapy and physical therapy within one room. The three related providers supported that student in a 30-minute block versus three separate 30-minute blocks. And it really, the impact for the student was huge because then they stayed in the classroom more often. So we're looking at every opportunity to really integrate that. The other piece that came out from William O. Schaefer that Brian and I talked about with the instructional coach for ELA was handwriting. Our kids have spent a lot of time Zooming, and our youngest students have not had a great deal of time with the art of handwriting. And that is an occupational therapy need and something that we see for our special ed students specifically. They have actually set forth a program proposal to run it for the entire student body at the elementary school. So it's things like that that are naturally coming out of the assessments now that many of our kids have returned, even the gen ed kids, that they're saying, wait, this is no longer a special ed need, but now we have a reg ed need too. So that's why it's hard to say, well, this will be special ed or this will be gen ed. It's really about meeting the kids where they are and what they need over a period of time. It can't all happen over the summer.
Right.
We want to be respectful of parents who can get an opportunity to have fun with their kids and things like that. The other component of that is new with regard to social emotional learning was the idea that many of the modified students did miss out on their athletic season because of COVID. And so we teach leadership and teamwork and social emotional well-being as part of our athletics program. We've always prided ourselves on that type of component. So we're just starting to investigate, what would that look like? Because that would draw a lot of kids at the secondary level if they thought they could come play basketball or learn how to swing a golf club, to Bill's point about a new golf team. So if we could integrate the idea of physical activity as a means by which to control anxiety and depression and use that as a step up for some of those students, like we're in it. There's staff that came on board. Some of the coaches reached out today, and we're pretty excited to explore that opportunity moving forward.
Now, I think the biggest challenge, as you could imagine, is time, right? So you've got before school, after school, kids are involved in clubs, sports, extracurriculars, you've got office hours. You know, we haven't ruled out looking at Saturday programming as well. We're really thinking long-term for next year. If we have the staff available to offer that, you know, before practice, after practice, whatever it is, we're really looking at each individual student, finding out from them what they think they need. It's not just about us saying, hey, we saw your report card, and based on this and based on your assessments, we think you need this. We want to hear from the kids. What are you nervous about next year? What classes do you think you might struggle in? Where do you need the help? And then we're going to tailor the program to meet their needs.
Great.
Mr. LaMadrid.
So a couple questions. First on this slide, I just wanted to clarify because a couple of different numbers were mentioned earlier, and we talked about Lonnie, you brought up the appropriation and how it could split between homestead, non-homestead, and that would affect the taxpayers' potential increase in their property taxes. But when we talk about a 0.1% increase, Cleo, just to clarify, that's at the property tax level. Or I think actually I'm on another page where it talks about the split of revenue. But to be clear, the total budget is increasing, by 1.4%, not 0.1%.
Correct.
I
Correct.
just want to make sure we clarified that point was made earlier, that is a 0.1% increase, right? And that's
In the tax levy.
it's in a tax levy, but the total budget is set to increase by 1.4. I just want to make sure that point was made. And then when we do look at employee benefits, just also to clarify the decrease, I understood the buyout piece of it, but for me also another key consideration in a change in employee benefits is the assumptions that are being used on pension increases and the like. So have you received guidance, Cleo, on just what's going to be the underlying increases from an actuarial perspective?
Yes. So ERS actually provides us with a projected amount for the following school year, for the 21-22 school year. So we've based on our projected payroll for civil service. So we've included that amount, as well as they give us an overall rate, but there are multiple tiers within ERS. So it's really a combination of looking at the projected bill, looking at our current civil service payroll, and really finding a good balance between the rate and the projected bill. So that was the assumption for ERS. TRS established the rate for next year, which was applied based on our projected classified personnel, certificated. So again, that will, if the certificated amount moves down, TRS moves down, and vice versa.
So then other than, I'll call it the mix change of individuals within civil service versus non, but the actual ERS rates and TRS rates, those rates are locked in at this point for next year?
Yeah, well, TRS is locked in, yes, and each of the tiers for ERS are locked in as well.
Good. Just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
And then can we talk about the fund balance page?
Yes.
I got it.
Thank you.
Just make sure I'm looking at this page. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about fund balance projections in the budget discussions, but this has, if I'm correct, a $5 million increase to the capital reserve.
Right. So that is funding the referendums that have been passed over the years, I think to the tune of $40 million. So those aren't fully funded yet. So as you can see, part of the funds are going into the reserve for tax tertiary based on, we keep track of all of those. They're kind of on a 3-year rolling basis. So we're putting some of those monies there, but the remaining amount is really funding the capital reserve.
So we're taking, as I understand it, we're taking 5 million of surplus funds from this school year and adding them to the capital reserve. A couple questions there. One, is there a limit on how much we can put into the capital reserve on any one year? Right, knowing that there's restrictions on how we can spend it and it has to go for voter approval. I just want to make sure that we're not exceeding any kind of caps on how much can go into the capital reserve.
I don't believe so. My understanding is when you have the voter approved amounts, you can, the board can fund those amounts, continue to fill the reserve using the fund balance that is provided. Again, because this is just a projection, the process that really happens at the end of the year is there's a very specific way to calculate the reserves for each of these. So the monies will get distributed based on those calculations, and they're pretty well funded. So I don't see a lot of movement on the other reserves. So for purposes of the projection, it seemed to make the most sense to put it into the capital because once we fund the other reserves, that's where the remaining amount. So.
Agreed. So, and again, just for clarification for everybody, right? Even though we're funding it potentially, right? Because this is, to your point, this is a projection, right? So potentially funding 5 million of surplus into capital reserve, it is still subject, those dollars do require separate voter approval on how those monies would get spent. So the other question I have is as we think about the other reserves, and forgive me, I don't remember which one it was. One of them, I think it's TRS reserves, and there's also the ERS, I think, is a separate reserve. One of them has a fixed cap that we could not put any more money into that reserve. And the other one, I thought we could actually increase how much goes into that reserve.
Well, so for each of them, so for the teacher retirement contribution reserve, for that one, that is a straight calculation will get provided from TRS, the contractual salaries for the year. We take 2% of that amount, and that's how that's what the reserve should be at the end of the year. For ERS, that one's not as straightforward, but in conversations with our auditors, it's basically anywhere between 2 and 3 years worth of what you have been paying in ERS contributions. So usually the auditors will review the amount and determine if it's reasonable in terms of both TRS and ERS.
Okay, so you confirmed, so TRS was the one that it sounds like it's a fixed calculation that you can't have more than that math.
Right.
I would say, again, as we get, and this is less of a budget question and more of a fund balance discussion, I think for board purposes, if we can have some analysis on the ERS reserve and understand some scenarios, because rather than funding the full amount of the capital, which I know are capital needs, and we've had more than enough discussions about how much money we need for capital, we should, though, have visibility to the ERS reserve and how much potentially we could be funding to that as well.
Right. So the ERS reserve is probably the one that has moved the least in my time here.
Correct.
If at all. And again, because it falls within the guidelines of what that reserve should be, our auditors review the amount. They indicate whether it's reasonable or not. It's not a straight, unfortunately, it's not a straightforward.
Yeah, I get it. So if you can share separately, maybe in a board report, that analysis, and is there, what is that range? And if we decided to allocate some money out of capital and into the retirement reserve, how much would that potentially be?
Okay.
On that note, isn't there a resolution, a board resolution ultimately for how the fund balance gets distributed?
Yes, there is.
So we can have those, more detailed conversations, at that point in time before we, pass that resolution to make sure we're all
Absolutely.
how that gets distributed.
And on that, Lonnie, so obviously in advance of that resolution, right? Because I think we should all align on it before it becomes a resolution. But then the last one here is the reserve for encumbrances as well, the $9, right? We should
Correct.
understand, right, all things fund balance related, in
Yeah.
advance.
Right. So I will say all of these reserves have a tremendous amount of backup and calculation that is used to fund them when it comes to the end of the year. The one that really doesn't is the ERS one. That's the one where as long as it's reasonable with what you've been paying out on an annual basis, then the auditors are usually good with it. But I can certainly include that. And yes, Mr. Jacobs, you are correct. That does get passed by board resolution. Basically, what will happen is the fund balance, the 33.9 million, will get distributed across all the reserves, the undesignated, and the reserve for encumbrances. As well. So you could see shifts, but the amount will be the amount. It just will get allocated accurately according to the calc.
That's what I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one more question? With all the conversation that we were having before with Dr. Stepanian on the learning loss programs, and I think it sounds like we have a lot of programs, which I think is great. But I think it would also be helpful to have some metrics or some type of data to show which one was the most effective, because I think it's an opportunity for us to see what we might want to keep in the future to address learning loss or gaps for those students, whether it's in the summer or before school hours or after school hours. So is that something that we can do?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We will. We track the data on our students' performance anyway, and we, as you know, have a data coordinator at the district level who works closely with the principals, instructional coaches, and teachers, as well as data teams at the school. So we will be tracking that. And I think the other piece, which I alluded to earlier, is attendance and participation is going to be a big part of that data. Because we can offer all the summer programming in the world, if we don't have a high level of participation and motivation, it's not going to be effective. So we are absolutely going to be tracking that very closely on an individual student basis to make sure that come June of 2022, every child and every family feels as though they had the opportunity and that they were availed of the resources and the staffing necessary to address those gaps. So excellent point, and we're absolutely going to be paying close attention to what programs worked well and which ones maybe didn't, and attendance also being factored in.
Okay, great, thank you.
So
I would add to that the piece of the really, right, we can do it within the summer program, right? But then when they come back in the fall, can they transfer the knowledge that they learned back into our curriculum and our content area classrooms, right? So there's that, what we call that system of checks and balances, where they might score well on an individual assessment, and they then apply the mathematics they learned when they come back in the fall. So, each of the curriculum instructional coaches and the team leads are working on what does the fall reentry plan look like to do immediate assessments of students based upon what we know about the summer, where we'll get a good number of our kids we hope to come in, but on the fall when everybody is back, how do we, and we know we have to use both formative and summative assessments to really get the best information we can on our students to plan our fall supports as well. So it's really an ongoing and an iterative process about knowing who the students are, what they need, applying the intervention, just like we do RTI throughout the school year. So it's kind of like RTI, massive K through 12, but that's what it will be like. And then to, again, to cater a little bit to the special ed conversation, IEP goals drive a student's IEP, right? The supports that the student gets. I do anticipate that to some degree, we may be having more frequent amendments and or CSE meetings, subcommittees to address those needs, because they might be a little bit more volatile as we apply the interventions than we anticipated. So the special ed department is fully aware of that.
You know, it's looking at individuals, student schedules, both during school and outside of school. So if you have a student who plays, you know, sports in the fall, but they don't play a winter sport, you know, we have to take that into account. As soon as the fall sports season ends, maybe that's the time that child now has time after school to come. So we're really going to be looking at every child and having that conversation with the family to say, what do you need? How can we make this work? When are you available to come? We've got a long year ahead of us. What is the ideal time for you to participate before school, after school, or on weekends?
And the other piece of the program specifically for secondary is this idea of college preparation and career readiness. And I know that has come up by several board members in the past. So we are specifically looking at ways to increase activity in what we call Naviance, which with George's, Mr. Brady, Director of Technology. We now have that at the middle school, but again, the pandemic has caused some issues with rolling that out on top of other platforms. So we are looking to our school counseling staff to work with our juniors. Certainly if there are seniors that are still struggling during the summer to help them launch and to get our sophomores and juniors ready onto Naviance, doing their interstellarizer and really ramp that up, because we know that has been a struggle for many of our students. And the middle school staff was just as engaged in that conversation as were the high school staffs. And then for each building that has a transition grade level, targeting specific activities to bridge both the curriculum and their whole social life as they leave their school and go to a new one where their classes are typically reset. So those are definite ongoing conversations about how to target that.
So two questions I have that came up during these discussions. One question is, I know we've spoken about learning loss and regression and bridging the summer, but I also know that historically, come the start of the school year, that we're slow in providing services for our various students because they're new to the building and they're trying to set up the schedules and so forth. So with our focus on the summer, regression and, lost learning, are we also looking at how we can implement the services, on a more expedited basis than what we've traditionally done once school starts?
So with regard to special education services, Mr. Jacobs, they have to be started on the first day of school. That doesn't mean every kid gets, if they have speech on the first day of school, it has to be in compliance with their IEP. So with regard to special education students, and E&L students, and our 504 students, their documents read the first day of school, and all case managers use the 2 superintendent's conference days prior to that. One of their major events and hurdles is that they have to articulate the IEP to all service providers, and the service providers in turn create the rotation schedules. Typically the 1 out of a 6-day cycle is what they get. With regard to typically the other piece of that is at the high school level in our school counseling office. When we have students register less than 72 hours prior at the high school or the middle school, especially if they come in as an E&L student, they do need to be tested. And I know that we in the past have arranged for that testing as soon as possible, but it's also contingent upon whether that student is available for testing. So what we have done to mitigate the impact is we've still invited the student in. Depending upon their level of English, we have provided them with a mentor at that building, and they follow that student's schedule, who would typically have like a freshman schedule at the high school, a freshman E&L schedule at the high school or at the middle school. So we have done that. It's a little trickier when you hit the high school level because putting them into any class just doesn't work. It won't, socially, emotionally, it's not good for that child. But certainly I do anticipate that any new student will be invited in immediately to walk the grounds and to assess their own anxiety. Because I can't imagine moving here in this pandemic has been easy. And we do know that we are getting new entrants every day across all grade levels. So as soon as they come in, certainly if they're classified, we have a process in place by which to build a transition IEP. ENL 504, same thing, that's on our radar. But if they're brand new, we will certainly use whatever means we have to by which to get them scheduled to up and run on the opening day of school and get them started. But there are some nuances with certain subgroups that require certain forms of testing and things like that, which can hinder somebody from starting on day one, specifically at the high school.
And I would just add, even students who are receiving responsive intervention services, those students are being scheduled in the spring and summer so that they begin receiving services within the first week or two of school. So you're right, Mr. Jacobs, that has historically been an issue in this district, but hasn't been in recent years.
I'm glad to hear that's been addressed and is being addressed. So the other question I had was for Mr. Brady, and it looks like he may have stepped away. So maybe you can.
He's
He's here.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking with all the discussions about, bringing all the students back into the buildings, and with what we've done with technology in terms of utilization in the classrooms and so forth, when all these students come back into the buildings, all the administration and staff comes back into the buildings and bring with them all these devices, will our infrastructure be able to support everything coming back into the building and multiple devices and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. If you remember from my board reports over the last 2 years, I've actually put an access point in every classroom. We just this past fall completed William O. Schaefer. So K-12, every classroom actually now has its own individualized access point, which can easily support 40 devices. The nice thing with Chromebooks, they're really a web browser. So it's not like you have a laptop where you're logging into the network and it's pulling down your profile and adding security. It's really, you're going to a web page. Now, I'm not going to say that if you have a classroom of 30 students all trying to hit the same YouTube video, that, some may be spotty here or there, but in those situations, that's where we would work with the staff to say, listen, all 30 students don't need to be looking at the same video, right? So maybe the teacher could bring up the main video to look at, and then groups could cut off and work together. Obviously, in the pandemic and social distancing, that's going to be a little tricky. But I'm pretty confident in the investments that we've been able to make with your support over the last several years that, knock on wood, we should be really good to go. The other thing that Jack Rowell and myself have been doing over the last month, we've actually been touring each of the buildings, looking at the exterior places where we can enhance learning. So we've had a wireless vendor out. They're currently working on the design to add additional access points to our outside areas. So it'd be common areas, whether it's a playground or at the high school, the common courts between the lunch and the library, to be able to even facilitate taking those students outside and reaping the benefits of still having connectivity.
Thank you. Good. Nice to hear that. So, are there any other questions from the board? Looks like right now the board's satisfied with their questions, Dr. Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. So next steps, just charting a way forward to get us to our, ultimately, we're looking at our May 18th, Tuesday annual meeting where we will have our unified statewide budget vote, Board of Education election. We got a few more key dates that we have to discuss to get us to that date, to get us towards a successful adoption. I would like to read off a couple of those dates that are critical, and that'll help frame our work going forward over the next couple of weeks. But for the benefit of the folks who are listening to us tonight live on YouTube, this information, the budget calendar, will be linked tomorrow. Ms. Trolla will go ahead and update our webpage with this information on it. But let me just go ahead and just sort of sketch out what the next couple of weeks are going to look like in terms of our work as we formulate this budget, because we are still in the budget development phase in anticipation of this adoption. So as I mentioned earlier, April 8th last week was our first budget workshop. Today was a continuation. This was an additional day that we felt that because of the constrictions or the restrictions related to COVID, that we did need this additional date. So at this point, I believe that, and I agree with you, Mr. Jacobs, I appreciate the robust conversation that the board has had. You've obviously reflected on this budget, and those questions were very helpful. Certainly, we will continue to incorporate that as we move forward. The next meeting as it relates to budget development is April 21st, which is the budget presentation and discussion with Finance Council. So we're going to expand our circle a little bit in terms of the folks who are actually contributing to this development process. I do know that I expect that, from what I've heard, I anticipate all board members will be in attendance. So therefore, there will be a quorum. And Mrs. Mascari, our district clerk, anticipates advertising that accordingly. But we certainly will welcome the expertise from our members of the Finance Council, who will go into a greater detail in terms of what the financial components are of the budget. And they will have an opportunity to go through and review alongside, shoulder to shoulder with this Board of Education, going through the anticipated spending plan from a financial perspective. Each of you should already have at this point a summary document of the proposed budget. I know Mr. Ardola worked very hard last Friday in terms of getting you those financials in anticipation of that the April 21st discussion. So you will actually have a few weeks to actually start to develop any ideas you might have as it relates to the actual financials themselves. Also, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what the revenue picture is going to be between now and April 21st. Although I know we've made some assumptions as it relates to some of the more recent revenues that have been provided to us through the recovery funds. But again, we can have a better discussion on that. We did the impact of those revenues won't necessarily, we're hoping, won't necessarily affect our expenditures, but possibly could affect our reserve strategy, which the board will consider in the summertime. But again, I think at this point, we feel that we have we're very proud of what we presented to the board as it relates to a summary proposed budget. And we hope that on April 21st, with the assistance of the Finance Council, that we'll have something closer to a final draft that we hope that, we're confident that you as a board will be able to adopt on April 22nd, which will be the day after the Finance Council. That takes us to budget adoption. Again, there could be some, and I don't want to presume that the board is going to adopt on April 22nd. There's a chance that you want to extend that date for additional deliberations, because you may, again, between now and April 22nd, there could be additional questions that could come up. And we don't want to rush the board because we want this to be as high quality as possible, and obviously to reflect, what we anticipate will be a challenging year next year. So we really want to make sure that we measure twice and cut once. But in the event that you're not able to adopt on April 22nd, the property tax report card must be submitted to the State Education Department no later than close of business on April 26th. So that does give us a little bit of a sort of an extension in the event that you're, again, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to adopt on April 22nd. But again, we can't go past April 26th in terms of our ability to finalize the adoption vis-a-vis board resolution. So we're hoping that we won't need to use that backup date of April 26th, but it's there if we need it. So we're going to shoot for April 21st. I am open to any and all suggestions from the Board of Education. between now and April 21st in terms of providing you with whatever information you may need to be able to make the best possible decision as it relates to development and ultimately towards budget adoption. One date that I did not mention that is not necessarily related to budget adoption, but I think it's important for the Board of Education to have this on your screen, as well as the folks at home. The date of April 19th, which is the submission of petitions for Board of Education candidates and submission of petitions for propositions to be placed on the ballots. So again, that April 19th date is a legal date as it relates to the timely submission of petitions for Board of Education candidates. Again, that's separate, but again, it does relate to the referendum and the annual vote on May 18th. So that is a critical date as well. So any and all information that I've just given to you, I know I've thrown a few specifics out there. Again, we'll make sure that that is hyperlinked onto our budget page on our website, so folks are able to see that at home, so they're familiar with what's happening. As we're discussing the folks at home and people of the public, at some point in time, we want them to be able to thoughtfully and willingly vote on this budget and make it their budget. This budget will belong at some point to the people who live here in our school district. That vote is on May 18th. But in order that folks are making very informed decisions, that on May 6th, we do have a budget hearing that will be held, and that will follow a sort of a standard format because there are certain items in that hearing that have to be addressed by law, one of which you've heard me talk about a little bit earlier, or at least last meeting, is the three-part component budget, which considers the administrative costs, the instructional costs, as well as the capital expenditures. So I know Ms. Girandola is actively engaged in preparing that presentation for the budget hearing, but she and I will both be presenting that on May 6th, as is my job to do so as the school superintendent, and as is her responsibility as our chief financial officer. And I'm sure that, again, that will be a very great opportunity for our community to join in. What the format's going to look like, that obviously we won't be back in person on May 6th in terms of our board meeting. So we'll make sure that we provide a schedule. Mr. Jacobs, Mr. LaMadrid as board president and vice president will discuss what that format will look like for the May 6th budget hearing. But we obviously want folks to be able to provide us with their questions, and we want to be able to answer those questions for them. So again, people can make the best possible decisions. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the days and weeks ahead. So with that, I think those are all the critical dates that I think will impact on a successful budget cycle. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Jacobs, because that concludes our budget workshop.
Does any board member have any additional comments at this point in time? All right, I think we're good at this point in time. We look forward to the meeting with Finance Council, and I'm sure we'll do our homework between now and then as well and come up with more questions for our meeting with Finance Council.
Thank you.
All right, I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate everybody's effort in terms of developing the budget and going through the revisions to it and responding to the board's questions. So, have a good evening and stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, team.